Hello Mayhem Makers, I'm Mindy with Quilting Mayhem and welcome to the Beyond Square Sew Along. We are on to week 2. Last week we did the center square. Remember, if you bought kits, yours may be different colors than mine, or of course if you're working with your own fabric, you might have different choices. So this week we're going to actually do 2 different blocks. There's a couple really easy ones, so I thought we sort of speed this sew along and get it going so we get done by the end of August. So your homework for this week is flying geese and pinwheels. We're going to start with the simple flying geese block. We actually did it last week for the center square. I'm just going to revisit the instructions real quick and then we'll show you the pinwheel block. So a nice easy week for you guys to get some parts of your quilt done, and we'll just kind of keep it rolling along. So we're going to kind of move our camera around, so we'll be right back. All right. So we have our main rectangle for the body of our flying geese block. We have 2 squares that are going to be each corner. So you're going to start with just marking using your trusty Creative Grid ruler, lining up corner to corner. I just use friction pins because they go away with heat. You do have to be careful. I am working on a batik, and sometimes a friction pin, especially on a batik, is where I've seen the case. The heat will make the color go away, but you may see what they call a ghost line, so a white line would appear. In this case of what we're doing, it's not going to matter. It's going to be hidden in the quilt, so we don't really care if that happens to our block or not. If you're marking, say, a quilting design, you may care because that would show on your quilt top. For this case, we're okay. So lay your 1 square with your diagonal going from the center to 1 corner. I'm going to take this to my machine, sew on my line, trim, and press it open. So I will be right back. All right, so we have our first block on. As you can see, I've pressed it open. Especially in this scenario where this is a lighter fabric, I definitely would not press all the way to the light. If you're going to press both all the way, make sure the light is going to the dark side, otherwise press open. I find that when I press my seams open, especially with geese, I have better success with getting my 1/4 inch at the top. It just seems to be flatter, and I don't lose any of my seam allowance in having kind of a thicker lump at the top by pressing everything outward or inward. So I'm an open presser most of the time anyways, and especially in the case of flying geese. So I have my line on this one, and then I'm going to stitch on it, trim it, and we'll come back and our flying geese block will be done. I will be right back. Alright, so here we have our final flying geese block. What I like about this Creative Grid ruler is it has the little crosshairs on it, so I can kind of double check my seam allowance. So where the coral fabric meets with the background, I still have a 1/4 inch. I'm not sure if you're going to see that really well in my camera or not. And then I can just double check. Make sure, yes, we're at 3.5 by 6.5. We are good. So for the flying geese, that's all you've got to do for this part. And now we'll move on to the pinwheel. So I will be right back. I just got to grab some fabric and we'll move on to the pinwheel. All right, so we're moving on to pinwheels. I have a background fabric, and I have this pattern calls for the lime green. It's whatever medium you're working with in your fabric choices. To make pinwheels, you will need for this block 2 of the light, 2 of the medium per block, and then it is having you make 8 of them. So we're just going to start out with the basic step. On your light fabric, on the wrong side, if you're using a print fabric, draw a diagonal line. Once again, just using good old friction pen. This one's a fairly easy. You place them right sides together. Of course, with a batik, there is no real right side. I'm going to stitch 1/4 inch on either side, cut and press open. So I've got a little cheater piece here. So I have my line. I've stitched both sides. We're going to cut on the line. I'm going to take it to my iron and press it open. And then I will be right back to show you the next step before we get to the finished block. So I'll be back in just a moment. Alright, so we have 4 half square triangles. 2 came from each set of squares. Now here's the important piece. Not a lot of people like, but it's super, super important. we're going to trim these to 3.5 inches. You need to make sure they're actually 3.5 inches, and as you can tell, they're a lot bigger, so you have plenty of room to trim. And this is where my other little favorite ruler, my little 4.5 square, this guy I use tons. So I line up my diagonal line on that sew line, and then trim 2 sides, flip it, line up my diagonal, and I'm lining up my bottom edges again. Here, maybe we'll get a better shot for you. And trim again. We're going to do this for all 4 squares, and then I'll show you how the pinwheel is going to lay out before we actually put it together. Just keep trimming. It can get really tedious if you're having to do a whole bunch of these guys. Holy cow, it gets a little tiring. But like I said, super important. Otherwise your blocks are not going to fit with the rest of your quilt. That gets really obnoxious when you start putting things together and you wonder why they don't all line up. This could be one of your problems, is that you did not trim to the size you were told. And this is what I love about pattern designers that make sure they give you extra so that you can trim, because if they don't, sometimes you end up a little too short, and then it becomes a struggle the opposite direction to get things to fit when you don't have enough. So get those guys out of the way, and then just start putting our pinwheels together. Line out, and then I'm going to go sew it together, and we'll show you what the finished block looks like. Alright, so as you can tell, we now have a happy little pinwheel that's finished with nice little points in the center, and it's all done. So this week, super easy. You're going to make 8 of these lovely pinwheels, 24 flying geese, so this is the one that's going to take you a little longer. And then you have from last week your little center square. And this is where you should be at by the time the week is over and we catch back up next week. So until then, happy stitching.